And we're live. Hi everyone, I'm Michael Dean, I'm Principal of Avamore Capital. I'm here with my colleague and co-founder Nick Petkov, who's also a Principal of Avamore Capital. And we're here today to talk to you about how you go about getting development finance. Nick.
Hi everyone.
So, Nick, what's the best way to get in touch with a development lender? What are the ways you can get in touch with a development lender if you've got a requirement?
Well, mainly there are two ways. You can either approach them directly, of course, or you can use a specialist development finance broker. Obviously, if you approach them directly, the few benefits of that you can save on the arrangement fees, but at the same time, you can't actually take advantage of the leverage that a broker can apply to the development finance lender.
Because of course a broker can help you access the entire market, and
Absolutely.
because you can access the entire market, it means that you can you've got a better idea of what is available out there for you.
Maybe approaching directly a lender would be more beneficial for very experienced developers
That perhaps have a good knowledge of the wide market.
very well and work with most of the lenders.
Yeah.
But for any new developers, I would definitely recommend brokers.
Okay. So why don't we talk through the steps about how you go about getting development finance? So presumably the first step that you've got is in securing development finance is you have to secure the site. I mean, that's the most important thing. But let's say you've got the site.
Maybe before the site, we need to start with.
You want to go a bit further back then in the process?
Maybe with the concept of what the developer wants to do.
Yeah.
So it's all about preparation, research, and finding the relevant information.
Okay.
Of course, you definitely need to get in touch with local agents. You just need to know more about the area. What is the right product for that area? Who will be your potential buyer? And maybe think of any issues and find out how helpful is the local authority, etc., etc. And then once obviously you secure the site, you want to prepare like a full pack of information so you can go to the relevant lender.
And presumably, you if you're looking to get on site straight away and start building, you want to make sure to check the planning, check rights of light, check for any potential issues that might stop you from actually making progress.
Everything. You need to check all relevant reports. You might want to check the SOAR report. As you mentioned, any rights of light issues.
Why would someone need to check
access?
Why would someone need to check a soil report, for example?
Because that can definitely change the development budget.
In what way?
If, for example, there is contamination on site,
yeah,
then obviously that should be incorporated within the development budget.
Because the contamination would need to be remediated, and that comes at a cost.
And that can be really expensive at times. Also, you need to make sure that you don't need to do more excessive works on the foundation. That's also very or extremely expensive.
What would we be talking about here?
Additional piling, for example, underpinning.
Yeah, sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you talked about access, because we've seen a few situations where access is a problem.
And sometimes it's a problem, and obviously we analyze all the information in a slightly different way, and maybe it's very helpful for the developer to try and understand how the lender's actually analyzing all the information they've been provided with, and especially with access, that can be a huge issue. We had an example recently, if you remember.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not going to mention
don't mention any names,
details, no. But obviously, a really good developer, really nice project. But then at some point we found out that there is a really big problem with the access, and that can be really crucial, because at some point you need to think of selling the units, and we are a private lender. We may take a view, or there may be some available insurance products on the market that can protect everyone's position, but at the same time, not all the lenders will take the same view. So
You're talking about mortgage lenders.
I'm talking about mortgage lenders.
So just to clarify for people, if you're looking to develop a site, you've also got to be thinking about your end buyer being able to get a mortgage on something. And it's all well and good saying, well, it's fine, I don't think it's ever going to be a problem, no one's ever going to kick up a fuss, no one's ever going to ask me for money. The problem is that you have to assume that your development, that your buyer of your development can get a mortgage for the property. If they can't get a mortgage for the property, then you're limited to cash buyers. And if you're limited to cash buyers, you're not going to get as much money for the property. So it's very important that when you're looking to develop a site, that you're going to be able to get buyers who can obtain mortgages. And if you can't, then you've got to make an appropriate allowance for that.
And that should then also a proper adjustment to the residual value of the land, because that's also very, very important. We know that another project up north, if you remember, I'm not going to mention names again, there was an unregistered strip of land, and that actually changed the access to the site. And obviously, if you don't have access to the site, basically the value of the land is completely different.
Well, I think that's a very important point.
You don't want to overpay for any properties, because then it's very, very different to obtain development finance and further down the line mortgages.
Well, it could be worse actually, because if you're faced with a site which is encumbered by a ransom strip, you end up with potentially a really serious issue, which means that you can't. If you've got a ransom strip, you can't. You know that the person who can hold you over a barrel, if the person who's got that piece of land, and that they can name their price essentially to get that ransom strip removed, or what have you, or perhaps end up entering into a JV with you as a joint developer. Okay, so assuming that they've done the homework and they've submitted the offer and they've got the site, what's the first step in obtaining the offer? It's submitting an inquiry to the lender.
It's either to the lender or
through the broker,
or through the broker. Yeah, you submit the inquiry. Of course, as I suggested, you should provide as much information as possible, because, I mean, every lender is analysing a lot of projects on a daily basis, and you need to sell your project to the lender as well. I mean, if, for example, we see a full pack of information and we are quite confident and comfortable with what's being provided initially, that makes a really big difference when we make our decisions, because we know that the developer has done a bit of research, they know the area, we feel more comfortable with the product they will deliver.
So you submit your information to the lender, and so what you submit the information to the lender, and what sort of things is a lender looking for? What sort of things are they looking out for?
Well, the basic things from the beginning is what is the cost of the land, all other fees, what is the cost to
the build, professional fees,
all professional fees included,
marketing costs,
and then what is the GDV, and the developer should be able to provide evidence of all that. Sometimes, I mean not sometimes, actually very often, the build cost provided by the developer and the build cost in the initial cost report is slightly different, and we know why. Because the monitoring surveyors, they want to make sure that at some point, if we have to step in and complete the project, we need to go to the open market and actually obtain quotes or deliver it at market cost. Whereas the developers, they know that they can save a lot of money during the construction, because they've been involved in that for a long time. They know people in the market, they know contractors, and that's why it's very important for the developer to provide more evidence and basically try to convince the lender that the build cost is the one that's been suggested initially.
Well, we've worked with we've talked to a number of developers who effectively go and do their own self-managed builds, one or two reasonably high-profile developers as well, and they've turned around and said to us that they think they can build new builds sometimes for less than £100 a square foot, and it's not that we don't believe that they can, but where they've expressed frustration with funders and lenders not agreeing to allocate build facilities at their build levels, which has then meant that there was less money available for the land advances. And the main reason for that, as Nick alluded to, is that we as a lender, if we have to step into a developer's shoes because for some reason the developer gets hit by a bus or decides to run off to Jamaica or something, we can only build as cheaply as a main build contractor can build for. We can't go, and we aren't developers. We don't have the ability to go and self-procure like a developer can. So when we make allocations for build facilities and development budgets, in those circumstances, we have to effectively make an allocation that corresponds to, not always exactly, but not far off what the build facility would be in a JCT contract. Okay, so
and maybe the next point is the GDV.
Yeah,
that's actually very, very important a number for the lender, and always try to find evidence of completed sales. It's absolutely necessary to speak with local agents, try to get as much information as possible, and sometimes actually the developers are willing to deliver slightly different product, maybe at the top end of that local market. That's also, of course, it's very good from their point of view, but the lenders should be convinced that's the right product for that market.
Okay.
So it's all about evidence. It's all about information.
So you submit your evidence to your lender, and what's a realistic amount that a borrower should a developer should expect to borrow from a development lender?
Depends. I mean, anything from maybe 60 to 70% of the GDV.
Of the GDV, and so the GDV is gross development value, or the aggregate sales of a development.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that 60 to 70%, is that a net advance? Is that, so let's say the development's worth £1 million. Does that mean that the borrower, the developer, gets £700,000 cash to fund the build, or the land and the build, or does that account for interest roll up as well?
Not exactly. That accounts for the interest as well. So from a lender's point of view, you want to make sure also that the developer will have 100% of the build cost most of the time.
Yeah.
So whatever is the remainder from the deducted retained interest of that 700,000 and the relevant build cost, then that would be the day one advance.
So let's say
against the land.
So let's say, for example, they borrow. A developer has the site with GDV of £1 million. They want to borrow £700,000.
So
what does that actually mean? It means they get, of the 700,000, you'll say you probably have 50,000 of interest and fees. Then you deduct another, let's call it 400 for the build, and then they've got 300 perhaps for the land.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that circumstance, you can see how it works, and it works its way back. But what if the land and the build together cost £650,000? Should a developer expect to receive 100% funding on a development?
Not necessarily, because and also there should be a story. The lender should understand whether the developer bought the project before they've achieved planning. So basically, they've added value. In theory, you can get 100% of the funds. I'll give you an example. If you buy a plot for, let's say, 300,000, then you obtain planning for a certain number of units, and based on the new planning, the new residual value of the land is, let's say, 500,000. Then obviously you've added 200,000 of value to that land, and at some point you want to refinance and move forward to development finance, then in theory you should be able to get the full 300,000 you paid initially for the land plus whatever the build cost, as long as the GDV and all other information stacks up.
Okay, so but
in our case is like we don't really penalise developers for
added
value, whereas not all the lenders are like that, and they want to see some equity from the borrower to remain in the project for obvious reasons, because we also want them to be involved, of course, and most lenders are like that. We want to make sure that the developer is still aligned with everyone else and wants to complete the project.
Okay, so and does every lender, does every lender just look at GDV, or do some lenders look at loan to cost? Do they have
loan to cost is also very important? Yeah. Most
so,
of
like,
the time
if you're
it's
borrowing
80,
from
85.
RBS or a clearing bank, what sort of loan to cost would you expect, including rolled up interest?
I think that would be maximum maybe 75, maybe 80 is actually too high.
No, I think it's more like 65 perhaps.
Yeah, and that's
and perhaps the challenger you might expect to get 75 gross,
yeah.
Probably, and that would be including rolled up interest as well.
Some private lenders you can get up to 95% gross.
Such as Avamore Capital. Okay, so moving on. So you've submitted so as a developer you've submitted the information to the lender. You've said, look, I need to borrow the maximum amount possible. What can the developer expect after that? So they've made the submission. How does the lender revert back?
Well, usually the lender is analysing all the information, and they would prepare an offer, initial offer to the borrower. So they will.
Is that a formal offer, or is it just sort of indicative?
Most of the time it's an indicative offer, because not always all the information is supplied from day one. So it's always indicative offer, subject to more information being provided or whatever the relevant case is.
Okay, and when let's say you submit the indicative offer to the developer, what happens if the developer's like, okay, great, the indicative offer letter looks good, I want to move forwards. What happens after that? Well,
then the borrower should be prepared to pay fee cost associated with the due diligence process, and that would be the commitment fee to the developer.
Yeah.
They should put their solicitors in funds so they can provide a cost undertaking to lenders, solicitors. They should pay the valuation, which is normally instructed by the lender, and they should also pay the monitoring surveyor in order for him to start working on the initial cost report.
What does the monitoring surveyor do?
Monitoring surveyor will visit the site. They will request a lot of information from the borrowers. They want to make sure that the cost that's being provided is enough to deliver the project. They will review all the warranties, all the appointments, professional team. They'll basically report to the lender what's available. I mean, at which stage of the development.
Yeah.
The borrower is.
So, I mean, my real understanding of a monitoring surveyor is
eyes and ears of the lender.
Yeah, correct. And probably the most important thing that the monitoring surveyor does is the monitoring surveyor establishes that the borrower, with his or her own internal capital sources, plus the lender's advances, would be sufficient to complete the project. And that's what's important for the developer, because what the developer doesn't, so for the lender, because what the lender doesn't want, and also the borrower doesn't want, is a situation where the the developer finds themselves in a situation where they don't have enough cash, and the lender says, "Well, I've made this much facility available to you, and you don't have enough, and actually you did your sums wrong. You don't have enough money to complete the project," and so that's why having a development monitor is very important. And their initial report, as Nick said, will effectively compile all the costs associated with the development and making sure that there's enough money there to do it, but also all the correct appointments, warranties, permissions, and anything else that might be potentially hazardous to the health of the project would get flagged by the monitoring surveyor at that point. Okay, so they've said the indicative terms are acceptable, the formal term sheet's gone out, and they've paid commitment fee, valuation fee, monitoring surveyor's fee, and they've put funds with their solicitor to provide an undertaking for the lender's solicitor's costs. What happens next?
We're waiting for the valuation report.
Yeah.
Obviously, then the lawyers will send all their property inquiries and all the information required to be provided by the borrower solicitors. Of course, the lender will start due diligence, like the internal due diligence process, and will start reviewing everything and analysing the project and moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, so
normally sometimes, I mean, I'm not sure that all the lenders are doing that, but obviously we are doing
that.
We would split the development facility in two parts, which is the land advance and the build facility. We understand that it may be difficult or time consuming for the borrowers to obtain all these all relevant warranties appointments on time, or to satisfy some planning conditions, pre-commencement conditions. So we are quite flexible, so we would allow them to draw funds on the land facility so they can purchase or refinance, and then at some point, once they satisfy all the conditions on the build facility, they should be able to start drawing funds from them.
Okay, so in terms of paperwork, what sort of paperwork should the developer expect to receive?
On the KYC, they should be able to provide copies of passport, proof of address, address history as well. In terms of development, then obviously information about the planning, valuation. I think that will come anyway. And it's a lot of information.
What about information about the contractor as well? I mean, is that important?
Yeah, of course. That's very.
I mean, they might be self-building, of course, and that, but would they might need to provide some information about the contract, the contractor's financial strength, albeit that's something that'll be reviewed by the project monitor.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
And of course, the planning. We should make sure that there are no really onerous planning conditions, or some of these can be discharged at some point. Want to make sure that no CL payments, Section 106. It's so much information.
There's a lot of information that needs to be reviewed by the lenders and by the, okay. So that's ultimately the due diligence. That's ultimately the due diligence in a bit of a nutshell. So assuming the due diligence checks out, what's the final process? So we're talking about the security and finance documentation at this point then.
Yes, they need to sign. The security documents.
And do you want to just explain the types of security documentation that they need to be signing?
Usually, it's loan agreement, debenture, shares. Share charge over the borrowing company, personal guarantee, cost overrun guarantee. If there are any subordinated creditors, then deed of subordination. If there are any second charge lenders, then
deed of priority.
And they should also sign the JCT contract, and we'll have a charge on the JCT contract as well. But that's not just part of it.
And that would be on the basis. That would be on the basis that the JCT contract is there is a third party contractor, and they're not doing a self procurement route.
And it's when they're signing the personal guarantee, they should make sure that they had independent legal advice from another law firm or getting that internally. If the law firm they're using is big enough, they can provide that internally. But
what if a developer doesn't want to give a personal guarantee?
Well, usually most lenders would request that, and not because we want to know that the developer is interested in completing the project, and
we want their commitment, basically.
A bit commitment, and it's normally a bit of a red flag when they don't want to provide personal guarantees, because I mean the lender basically is an investor in developers' project, and when we can't see that kind of commitment, it's not great. I mean, it's not very helpful for the borrower.
Well, it's not always the best sign if a developer doesn't want to provide a PG. We know, of course, a lot of developers were on the wrong end of personal guarantees in the last crisis. I think from our experience, our preference on PG side is mainly, it's not because we want to reclaim capital from developers. It's more because we want to stop them. We don't want people to run off to the beach when things are going wrong. We want people to if they start a project, we want them to finish it. I think that's the main thing. It's not because we're looking to take shirts off people's backs.
Absolutely.
I think that's the last thing we want to do.
Just looking for commitment. Really.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
That's why we can be actually flexible, not requiring 100% personal guarantees.
Yeah.
We can limit the personal guarantees. So
Yeah. So the personal guarantees are limited to the liabilities under the loan, or they can be capped at an agreeable level. Okay. What about the loan agreement? What's important about the loan agreement? What's so special about the loan agreement?
The loan agreement is very important document, because it shows contractually what are the obligations of both parties, and very often developers are not even reading the full loan agreement, and it's actually a must to do that.
Why is it so important that they read the loan agreement before they sign it?
Because they need to understand what kind of covenants, for example, recording in the loan agreement, what they've agreed to do. You may have a covenant where the developer needs to complete a certain project in 10 months, and if they're not aware of that, and they take more time, that may lead to some penalties, and no one wants that.
What does the lender's solicitor check? What's some of the important things that a lender's solicitor does during the development finance process?
Checking whether the developer is complying with the security documents, really.
Yeah, but what I mean is before they draw down, so pre-completion.
Whether they're satisfied, or condition precedents.
Yeah.
On the facility.
And what about on the property side? What is the lender solicitor looking out for? What is the main thing that the lender solicitor do on the property side? Ownership,
everything.
And I guess one of the key things there will be they'll look at the report and title.
Oh yeah,
as well.
The report and title. Yeah.
And it's absolutely vital that a lender solicitor is provided with all the information at the earliest stage, and our experience is that the more information you can provide, even if there are some potential issues with the title, the earlier those can be flagged, the earlier they can be dealt with, and the better the lender's perception will be of a developer. We talked about some of the potential issues that might come out of a review of the report and title. One of the things we didn't touch on is any potential encumbrances, like call option agreements, for example. We've seen instances where ultimately the certain pieces of land had to be swapped with neighbouring owners, and if they weren't done within a certain time frame, an increased liability was going to be created for that particular developer. And that was a situation where we still
automatically affects the value of the land and the GDV, of course.
So of course, when those kind of issues arise, what happens in those circumstances is that we would have to then send the report and title. Once the report and title is completed, we send that report and title back to the valuer, and the valuer will then confirm their valuation on the basis of that report and title. Now, one of the challenges that can bring is that if you have a report and title that essentially says, look, what you thought was really a sheep is actually a goat, then ultimately the valuer has to then turn around and say, okay, well, on that basis I have to make the necessary valuation adjustment to reflect that. And so if you do have something that amounts to a potential encumbrance on the land, something that could create an increased liability to the developer and or the lender, then that's going to have a negative impact on the land value, and that will then ultimately have to impact the amount of advance that a lender might make, because their risk just increased, and perhaps their loan to value covenant would be breached, or they have to allocate more money towards the build facility than they thought, because that's an additional piece of funding that they're going to have to make down the road, and that will therefore have to be subtracted from the land facility that would be being advanced to the developer. So it's very important to understand that just because the valuation comes out clean, until the report and title is carried out by the developer, the valuation is not final. The valuation only becomes final when the report and title goes back to the valuer, and the valuer then says, okay, I've seen the report and title, I can see that there's nothing in this report and title that would affect my valuation, or there are a couple of items that might affect my valuation. You need to do this, this, and this. If this, and this are done, then it's fine. Or they'll say, actually, I need to go away, redo my sums, and I'm going to come back with a figure that's 5% lower, 10% lower, whatever the case may be.
Then again, go back to when we discussed the provision of information and doing your research.
Yeah, you need to be full and frank. And if you're aware of an issue on a site, you need to be full and frank with your lender, because there's something that's called mortgage fraud, and if you're not full and frank with your lender when you're providing them with information, it's something you could be guilty of. And frankly, I think if you find yourself in that position, it's really not worth it if you then get pursued by your lender later on because of information you deliberately withheld, or you deliberately misled your lender. Okay, so let's say you've got your indicative offer, you've provided the lender with all the information, the valuer has gone to the site, the monitoring surveyor has been to the site, the monitoring surveyor has asked you lots of questions, you've given them lots of answers, he's put together his report, the numbers add up,
satisfy
all the conditions. What happens next?
Get your money.
You get your money, but you only get your land advance.
You only get your land advance, and once you satisfy all conditions under the build facility, then of course you'll be able to get money under the build facility.
And how do you draw money under a build facility typically?
Usually it's drawn in arrears.
And how frequent is that?
Most of the time on a monthly basis.
But could you negotiate that on a more frequent basis?
Yes, of course.
But you would have to pay for
maybe additional monitoring fee or management fee. But yeah, that's.
So if you're prepared to pay for a monitoring surveyor to go down to the site every fortnight or every 3 weeks, then accordingly you'll get additional drawdowns. Okay, and what happens?
Depends on the size of the project. Sometimes there are retentions in that build facility. It's all in the JCT contract, but usually it's between 3 and 5%, and that's on behalf of.
So of a demand made by a contractor, for example, you might only pay 95 to 97% of that, depending on the contractual arrangements that you have.
The remainder is released after successful completion.
So essentially, just to sum it up, if you want to get a development drawdown, you effectively go to your lender and go, right, I need some money, and he'll say, okay, has the monitoring surveyor been to the site? Have you done your drawdown request? Has the monitoring surveyor signed off your drawdown request?
Yeah.
Okay, and if all three of those are met, you get your money. What happens if there's a problem during the build? What should you do?
problem. I mean, it depends on what kind of problem. But for example, because of unforeseen circumstances, there's cost overrun on the project. Then usually the developer and the lender need to discuss that and basically arrange for the borrower to make these cost overruns.
Yeah.
Which is not great, but again, that's going back everything to preparation and research. And
yeah, I suppose that's right. If you know what's in the ground, then you're going to. If you know what's in the ground, then you're going to know how to budget for it.
Exactly.
If you're building in a location that's known to have archaeological issues, I guess you need to allow for a contingency in your budget.
Absolutely. That's why it's not very helpful if the developers are stretching too much in terms of working on few projects at the same time and really stretching their equity and relying on
resources as well.
On external equity only, because some external equity providers, JV partners, whatever you call it, they may be willing to help the borrower with these cost overruns, but that may not be the case.
Some of these guys, they just want to write one check once and then and that's it. Call me when you can send me a check back.
And these are always not always very pleasant conversations
No.
to have. Yeah.
What about float? I mean, one of the things we've noticed is that developers often, more inexperienced developers or developers who have limited cash resources and often are borrowing their equity from investors, don't have enough float. Can you explain why having some float is important?
Because of the reasons we just mentioned, you should be able to meet any additional costs.
And you need also money to get the site set up and started as well.
Exactly, for preliminary works, everything. I mean, if you have enough resources, it always gives you a lot of advantages as a borrower, because you've got the freedom. You've got the freedom to start doing some of the works and not just rely on the lender or your JV partners, because there may be a few other small costs, additional report, and you want to make sure that you've got enough cash.
Yeah, and if you're running behind schedule on a project, what's the best thing you can do as a developer when it comes to your development lender?
Oh, definitely approach the development lender and try maybe to negotiate an extension.
Yeah, communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very important.
It's a lot easier to be responsive as a lender if you get a phone call from a developer 3 or 4 months before the end of their term saying, look, we think we're going to need an extension of 2 or 3 months. Can we get an extension? As opposed to a fortnight before the loan's due to be repaid, and the lender's thinking, okay, great, I'm going to get repaid, and then you actually say, actually, guys, we need a few more months. It's a very different conversation. You know, the state of mind of both parties is very different, and you're going to get a much better response if you're going in proactively at an early stage as opposed to going in reactively at the last minute. That's going to be a very different conversation.
And ultimately, we want to find a solution. I mean, obviously, the security documents are predominantly in favor of the lender, and that's very normal. But at the same time, we're not just sitting in the office and reading all these documents and monitoring all the time and finding a reason to put someone in default or to become difficult. It's exactly the opposite. We are here to find solution and to make sure that the project is delivered.
Okay. So in a nutshell, if you want to get development finance, the steps you've got to go through are: first one, compile all the information you need to do all your due diligence before you go ahead and agree to buy a site. Second is to secure the site. The third is then to make your inquiry, either through a broker or directly. The fourth one is to provide your development lender with as much information as possible, as early as possible, in as much detail, and having covered off as many of the risks as possible that you'll find on site. The development lender will then, in the fifth instance, provide you with an indicative offer, perhaps ask for some further clarifications on the scheme. Sixth stage will be you'll say that you want to proceed with the indicative offer and you'll get a formal offer. The seventh step will be on accepting the formal offer to pay for valuations, monitoring surveyors, solicitors' undertakings, because you're ultimately going to have to pay the costs of the lender solicitor. And then the legal DD process will start. The legal DD will be ongoing. Your solicitor will then have to provide the lender solicitor with as much information as possible with regards to the site, with regards to the corporate structure, with regards to any shareholder loans, with regards to any junior loans, equity loans, what have you, so that the security documentation can be put together. The lender solicitor will then, alongside the lenders, review the monitoring surveyor's report, the valuer's report, in order to prepare the report on title. The lenders will then sit down with the monitoring surveyor and the valuer to establish whether the key parameters of the loan are still relevant, and those key parameters are the loan, the build facility, the land facility, the interest facility, the loan to value from a day one perspective, the loan to value or the loan to GDV from a completed perspective, and the loan to cost, ensuring that the lender's loan to cost parameters are still met. Then the security documentation can be finalised. Security documentation on being finalised is then signed by the borrower, any guarantors, any junior lenders, and of course the lenders themselves. All final outstanding requirements under the security documentation need to be satisfied for the first drawdown. Once the first drawdown occurs, that generally either enables the developer to refinance any existing lender that's on the site if they already own the site, or alternatively it gives them the money to acquire the site from the previous owner. And then as the build progresses, the developer will then submit monthly or more frequent drawdown requests to the lender, having satisfied all of the lender's requirements at each monthly stage, with a monitoring surveyor going out and signing off the amounts being requested by the developer, and there always being enough money left in the lender's build facility to complete the development project. Ultimately, you'll get to practical completion of the development. You'll sell the units, you'll make lots of money, and you'll start all over again. And hopefully, you'll be doing that with us at Avamore Capital. Nick, thank you for your time with us today.
Thank you.
How do people get hold of you?
You can call the company's phone number or email at np@avamorecapital.com.
And where can people find you on social?
Facebook, most of the time.
Facebook most of the time.
I'm on Twitter as well.
What's your handle on Twitter and Instagram?
Property lender.
Property, is it at property_lender, or is it at
it's property_lender? Yeah.
Property_lender. Okay, great. Well, you can also get hold of me, Michael Dean. I'm MD at avamorecapital.com. You can also get hold of me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm at property_funder, and you can also get hold of me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you very much for your time in watching this video. We hope you found it helpful. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. All that leaves us to do is say thank you very much, and please do get in touch.
Thank you.